I'm going to show you how I made this smoking volcano cake, and you're going to be surprised at how easy it is. Start by baking two 13 by 9 inch cakes. Now, I actually baked 3 cakes because I really didn't know where I was going to go with this design, and I just baked way more cake than I needed. But you can make this using only two 13 by 9 inch cakes. So first, tort each of those cakes in half so you have 4 thin halves, and stack 2 of them together and put some filling in between the layers so you have one large 13 by 9 inch cake. Next, take one of the other halves and make a smaller rectangular cake next to the larger cake. Now my goal here was just to get an irregular shape. There's really no rules here. Then next I started carving a little bit away. Again, I really don't know where I'm going here. I just want it to look maybe a little bit like a landscape. And I'm thinking I might make it look like there's a cliff. I don't know. But I just know that you can just do whatever you want. It's all going to be covered up with frosting, so don't worry about making any mistakes, and don't worry at this point if the cake looks like a big mess. Next, I slathered on some chocolate frosting. I was not at all careful with this. The goal wasn't to get a flawless finish. I wanted to create some haphazard bumps and ridges from the frosting that would look like a rugged appearance. So if you are not good at covering a cake in frosting, you're gonna just have fun with covering this cake. You don't have to be careful. You can get a spoon and make it as messy as you want. Just make sure the whole cake is covered. So now I am grabbing that remaining half of a 13 by 9 inch cake, and I'm going to cut out several circles. This is a 6-inch circle cutter, and you actually don't even need to use a circle cutter. You can just freeform it with a knife. I am saving all of the cake scraps aside, and I'll show you what I'm going to do with that in a little while. But to start with, I'm just cutting out several 6 and a couple of 5-inch circles. Then I'm going to grab my large cake that I covered, and I'm going to start stacking those circles on the cake. Now I'm spreading some chocolate cake filling in between each of the layers, and I'm going to continue to stack them on top of each other until I have a tower that's about maybe 8 inches tall. At this point, it's looking a little wobbly and unsteady, but I'll show you what I'm going to do to stabilize this tower further on down the road. Now I'm going to take some leftover cake scraps and I'm going to blend that with some chocolate frosting until it's a really thick mortar-like consistency. I'm going to use that as cake mortar to shape the outside of this tower so it starts to look like a mountain. At this point, it's still feeling a little unsteady, so I'm going to stick a skewer down the center of it, and that will help kind of stabilize the mountain so it doesn't tip over. I placed the cake in the fridge so it would firm up a bit, and that would make it a little easier to decorate. So at this point, I am going to make some cookie crumbs that I can use as a moss-like decoration on the cake. Now, I actually don't know where I'm going with the design at this point, so I made a ton more cookie crumbs than I needed. If I had to do this all over again, I think I would only need about 10 cookies. But that's what happens when I don't have a solid plan before I start decorating. Anyhow, I'm blending up a whole bunch of cookie crumbs and I'm mixing them with some green food coloring. Next, I'm going to make some white chocolate ganache that I will use as the lava for the top of the volcano. Heat the cream in the microwave, then pour the hot cream over some chocolate chips and let it sit for a little while. Once it's melted, give it a stir until it's nice and smooth. Now this is an empty tube from a mini M&M candy container, and I am going to use that as the center of the volcano. So take a long knife and hollow out some of the cake in the center of the volcano. Save your scraps because you might need those later, and stick the tube down the center of the mountain. Now I'm going to use the additional cake scraps to kind of form a little bit of a mounded top to the volcano. That mortar-like paste that I made from the cake scraps makes it really easy to shape the top of the mountain, but it doesn't have to be perfect because it's just a mountain, so you can make it as lumpy and bumpy as you want. When you're all finished with that, then take some more frosting and frost the top of that mountain. Now, these are candy rocks that I found on Amazon, and I bought them in bulk because they are so fun to have around. But I'm going to use these as landscape decoration for the cake. And I am going to just scatter them everywhere haphazardly. I'm even using them as a border to finish the edge of the bottom portion of my cake. So at this point, I decided I wanted a water feature. So I'm carving a small section out of the cake where I think I'm going to have the water. I colored some of the chocolate ganache blue, and I added that to the cake where I wanted to have the water feature. And I made it look like there was a little bit of a waterfall. To give it a little bit more of a water-like effect, I colored some more ganache, a darker blue, added that in kind of splotches, and then I added some white ganache to make it look like there was a little bit of rippling water effect. Then I added some more candy rocks around the water feature. So at this point I wanted to see how well the toy dinosaurs fit on the cake. And I originally wanted to use 4 dinosaurs, but I felt like that was a little too crowded, so I just stuck with 3 of them. Then I went on to add some green foliage. I wanted to make this easy, so I used some rosemary sprigs. I stuck them around in little sections all over the cake so it looked like grass. Then I colored the rest of my white ganache in different colors of yellow, red, and orange, and I just haphazardly started pouring it down the edge of the top of the mountain. I used the various colors kind of alternating, and when I was finished with that, I took a toothpick and swirled the colors around a little bit so it would give a little bit more of a fire-like effect. After that, I took my cookie crumbs that I made earlier and I scattered them around in a haphazard effect just to give it more of a greenery look. And that was all I did for the decorating. The fun part comes next. I bought a large slab of dry ice at the grocery store, and I'm going to break that up into small pieces that will be big enough to fit down the center of that volcano tube. I'm wearing some clean garden gloves to protect my hands, and I'm just going to get a few chunks and put them in a smaller bag so that I can break it up. If you do this, make sure you keep the dry ice contained in a bag so that little bits don't fly into your eyes or get loose for somebody to touch. Next, I'm going to pour some warm tap water down that center tube where I placed that candy M&M container. Then I added a few chunks of dry ice down that chute, and that fog effect began, so it looks like it's an active volcano. And that's it. Our volcano cake is complete, smoke and all. I brought this to my grandson's dino-themed party, and when it was time to light the candles, I dropped the dry ice into the volcano. It was such a fun cake, and it was pretty easy to decorate. I hope this inspires you to give it a try. Thanks for watching.